There's something I've noticed when browsing through the Zelda games, specifically the ones made by Capcom. And it's that they're very odd and even a little bit inconsistent. And I actually mean that in a couple ways, so let's start with the Oracle games. Now, personally, I don't like these games. In fact, Oracle Seasons is by far my least favorite Zelda game out of the whole series. Not including the DS games because I haven't played those yet. Why I don't like Seasons is because it feels like such a slog to play through. There's all these menial tasks that you have to do in between dungeons, and freaking the dungeons I just hate. I don't like dungeons in general, but Seasons was really stretching me to my limit. The story is also really just bare bones and straightforward. Honestly, nothing even really happens. The entire point is just to save Din, who we only meet for like the first 5-10 minutes in before she gets kidnapped, and we don't see her again until, literally the last part of the game. Aegis fares a little better, but I don't really like it that much more, to be honest. It just kind of put me to sleep. Like, I found myself really disengaged when playing through Oracle of Ages. It also has the worst dungeon I've ever played through in any game ever, being Jabu Jabu's belly. And there's two reasons for that. There's the whole rising the water levels mechanic, and the stupid time travel mechanic, and mixed both in, it just makes for the worst time I've ever had playing through a dungeon. What also makes them odd is this probably isn't really the game's fault, but in the encyclopedia, I think, they list Holodrum and Librania, however it's pronounced, the locations that these games take place in. They're listed as parallel dimensions rather than different countries. And that's freaking stupid because these are some of the only games in the series that take place in a different location from Hyrule. And not just different locations, but these feel like established kingdoms too, with like their own lore and their own society going on. That I don't see why they felt the need to call them parallel dimensions or whatever. It's still just different countries. And as far as I can see, there was no in-game reason to do that. It's just Link gets teleported to a different place. If anything, what contradicts it is the linked ending for both Oracle games is Link sailing back to Hyrule on a ship, which wouldn't make sense if he was in a different dimension. I don't know. Oh, but about the inconsistency, I'm mostly thinking about its timeline placement. Now, prior to the Hyrule Historia timeline back in 2012, for each game there was always some sort of explanation or official quotes as to where they took place. The timeline gets a little murky once Majora's Mask was introduced, because then that was the whole where did the 2D games go, and then it got even more insane with the Wind Waker. But at least on the individual level, we knew which game takes place in relation to the other, for the most part. Except for Oracle Seasons and Ages. Guys, I swear I could not find a single official word on where these games were meant to take place at the time that they originally came out. Nothing in the games really tells us anything either, it's just the Triforce sending Link on a journey. There wasn't really anything definitive, like was this an already established Link? Was this a brand new Link altogether? What really vindicates this thought is how, in the timeline back in 2012, the Oracle games were placed in between Link to the Past and Link's Awakening. But in the Zelda Encyclopedia, they were the only games to have been moved, and they were moved after Link's Awakening instead. So what that tells me is that there was really no official stance on where the Oracle games were meant to take place originally, because if they were, then they wouldn't have been moved in the first place. Personally, I like the first placement better because of just how that coincides with Link sailing back to Hyrule on a ship, and that's the start of Link's Awakening. But from what I can understand for both versions of the timeline, this is still the same Link overall as from Link to the Past. Okay, so that's one oddity, or pair of oddities in regards to Zelda games. But next from Capcom came Four Swords, which was the bonus game that was bundled with the Game Boy Advance version of Link to the Past. Now, same deal here, I couldn't find an official word on where Four Swords was meant to take place in regards to the timeline, back when it originally came out. Although fun little fact is that this is actually the first time where we saw the Toon Link art style, before Wind Waker. What also makes this an oddity was just how inaccessible it is. I mean, it's a multiplayer exclusive game, so back in the day, you needed 2 copies of the game and, the link cable and all that to actually even play it. I mean, you can still do that nowadays, which I was lucky enough to do with my friend back in 12th grade, and that was a freaking blast. But there was also the Anniversary Edition that was released on DSiWare and 3DS. But it was only available during the 25th anniversary of Zelda, and then it was taken down. And then it was brought back up one random time in 2014, which was when I downloaded my version, and then it was taken out again. To this day, in my opinion, the distribution of Four Swords Anniversary is one of the most baffling things Nintendo has ever done. Worse so than all that business with Mario's 35th anniversary or Fire Emblem 1. There's like so many ways they could make this game more accessible to the general audience, but they just choose not to, and I'll never understand that. The last, and certainly not least, is the Minish Cap. Unlike Capcom's first attempts, this game is a lot better, and it's actually my personal favorite 2D Zelda game. It's not without its faults though. They got rid of a lot of Link's inherent abilities that were used from previous Zelda games, and locked them behind hidden scrolls that you'd had to learn as you progress through the game. Even something as simple as breaking a jar with your sword. Why is that a hidden ability? Not to sound like a broken record, but the same deal here with the timeline is I couldn't find out where these games were meant to be taking place. It's a prequel to Four Swords, so we know that, but where does this and Four Swords now take place? Who knows? A lot of theories, and then eventually Nintendo put these games at the beginning of the timeline. But then there was that weird thing where they broke up Four Swords with Four Swords Adventures, and Four Swords Adventures now takes place in one random branch of the timeline. Yeah, they clearly just made some stuff up as they went along. But it's actually the whole point of what I was getting at, is the games that involve Capcom where the placements aren't so clear as the rest of the games. All the Nintendo made ones had some sort of placement in one form or another, but not Oracle Seasons Their Ages, Minish Cap, or Four Swords beyond being a prequel and stuff. Four Swords Adventures is a pretty interesting one though, because that one was pure Nintendo. It was also the Capcom games where a lot of NPCs from Ocarina of Time were reused and began to make a lot of reappearances. I mean, yeah, technically Majora's Mask started that, but they actually had a reason to reuse the characters, whereas here, they just did it by choice. I mean, hell, the only times that Holodrum and Labrania were ever mentioned outside of those games were in Minish Cap, and that's because Minish Cap had its own version of Din and Nairu, although it's just a small side quest. I think the main idea of why I made this video is because of how the Zelda timeline has this reputation of being confusing and hard to understand. And if you look at it overall, then yeah, it sort of is, but if you take it step by step, and by that I mean of when the games first came out, then it's actually not too difficult to follow. But the Capcom games are what sort of throws a wrench at the whole thing, and it's really where most of the theorizing has to come in. Though I guess the timeline split doesn't help, but even then there's still placements for these games as they come out, and even more so in the games from the 2000s onwards, except for Breath of the Wild, but that was kind of done intentionally, for better or for worse. And that's the gist of what I wanted to mention for these games. Thanks for watching, and until next time.